Hi, everybody. My name is Eric Hines. I'm curator of film at Museum of the Moving Image. I want to thank you for joining us for this week's installment of the Reverse Shot Happy Hour. It is June 19th, 2020. It is Juneteenth. It is the first time that Juneteenth has been recognized in the city of New York. At the museum, we have had the day off to celebrate as a holiday. And it certainly seems like this is going to be a holiday going forward in the city, hopefully and beyond. It's a very, very important day, historically, very important day in the current moment. And so if you have been outside today as part of a protest or celebrations, thanks for joining us. If you are outside protesting or celebrating in various ways and joining us at a later date, thank you for checking in with us. As always, thanks for joining us for events here at the museum. I don't want to say too much more than that because we have a full hour of program awaiting us. Two guest writers are joining our hosts over the course of the hour. So to get started, I want to bring out our hosts of the Reverse Shot Happy Hour, the editors and founders of Reverse Shot, Michael Koresky and Jeff Reichert, and longtime contributor and filmmaker Farihah Zaman. Give us 1 second as I awkwardly let them in the room.
Hey.
Hi. We're always just waiting to be let into the room, am I right?
What people don't know is that, like, we're there all the time. We're just always in this kind of like creepy.
We're never not with you.
Exactly. We're just waiting for someone to turn on the lights. Someone, please.
Yeah, there has to be a smoother way to do this. Maybe we should write to Zoom and see if they can come up with something for the Reverse Shot Happy Hour. A little button there it could push just to bring us all right in together.
I can't open my lemonade. It's really like slippery. So that's what I'm doing. It's just in case people might be wondering the space that I'm making. My hand is so slippery. Anyway.
We support you in your labor and your thirst.
Try your shirt.
Yeah, well, anyway, continue. Hi, everybody.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here with us. This is the 6th time we've done the Reverse Shot Happy Hour, the 6th Reverse Shot Happy Hour, or the 5th?
6th.
6th. So, I don't know. We do this every Friday to talk about movies, talk about culture, talk about what's happening in the world. We also do this as, in part, a benefit for Museum of the Moving Image, which is the publisher of Reverse Shot. And if you are feeling so inclined and like this programming and the other programs they do, please think about making a donation to them, because a donation to the Museum of the Moving Image in this time supports Reverse Shot, and we'd love to have that support. So before we begin, because it is Juneteenth, there are actually two really great free online screening opportunities right now that kind of came through my inbox in various ways over the last couple of days, and I wanted to kind of draw people's attention to them before we talk. And we're not going to talk so much about these films, but I think they are linked in a lot of different ways to the sorts of things we're going to talk about on the show today. And the first is a film by Bill Greaves, who many of us probably know as the director of the great film Symbiosis-Psychotoxiplasm. It's a documentary called Nation Time Gary that he made in 1972, documenting the National Black Political Convention in Gary, Indiana, which happened in March of 1972. 10,000 Black politicians from across the country came to put together kind of a Black platform for what they wanted politics to achieve at the time. I haven't actually had a chance to see this film. It's been very much out of circulation. It was yet another one of those movies that was made for some PBS affiliate, deemed too radical in certain ways, heavily recut, and was out of circulation for a number of years, kind of not unlike Black's Britannica, which we talked about last week. And that is screening, the restoration is screening as part of AFI Docs, which is the big documentary festival out of Washington, D.C., and they're doing a virtual festival this year. And so we'll send a link around to that. It is screening, I believe, through the weekend. Yeah, it's available on demand June 18th through 21st. And the second film, I think we did allude to it a little bit last week. It's John Akomfra's Handsworth Songs. John Akomfra is a member of the Black Audio Film Collective. This is a movie that deals in a lot of the same terrain, a lot of the same geography as Black's Britannica, Midlands, England, looking at racial unrest, looking at riots, looking at class, but does it in a kind of a different way than Black's Britannica. I feel like Black's Britannica, what's marvelous about that film is the force of its straightforwardness, and it's so morally and aesthetically clear. Whereas like many of the Black Audio Film Collective movies, it's, even though there is a rage to it that is sort of palpable. The aesthetic is this sort of very kind of slippery thing throughout. It's fractured, it's discursive, the music is very seductive. It's a very different kind of aesthetic experience. And I think if folks are interested in watching Black's Britannica and Handsworth Songs, both of which are about an hour, would make for a really nice pairing this weekend. And so I'm going to put the links to both of those films in the chat window so you can check them out. I think they're both just screening through the weekend while Farihah explains what today's show is going to be about.
So as Jeff mentioned, we happen to land on Juneteenth, a holiday that I can't believe has not been more widely celebrated for longer, but it's nice to be creeping towards that. You know, we have been talking about how it's sometimes challenging to ride the line with a historical event that should be celebrated, that is a cause for celebration, but also has a kind of political resonance, and right now a very pointed political resonance. We also talked about how, in addition to today being Juneteenth, we're in the month of June, which is Pride Month. And I think that there's a really beautiful connection between these two celebratory holidays, regardless of how we may feel about how some are celebrated in a more corporate or superficial messaging way. They have really important roots, obviously, and that we've been thinking a lot about what sort of the modern face of activism and protest owes to Black trans people. Marsha P. Johnson, Stonewall, you know, like these are not just memes. And I love that there's been a renewed sort of look at what this sparked and how much we need to look back to history. And so we have two guests today who have contributed reverse shot reviews this week that are films that tackle different sides of this celebratory moment. We have Caden Mark Gardner, who is a film critic based in upstate New York, who wrote about the film Disclosure, which just dropped on Netflix today, I believe. And then Lisa, who's a film and sports writer, who wrote a review of The Five Bloods, the Spike Lee movie. Spike Lee, I think, is an artist who always brings a sense of historical perspective to otherwise contemporary exploration. And In the Five Bloods is a period piece that takes place in looking at veterans of the Vietnam War. So we're really excited to be able to take the idea of history and celebration of history as a theme today. And I know, Michael, you had something you've watched recently that you wanted to talk about as well that sort of fits into this idea.
Yeah, only briefly, just because I always like to also use this time to recommend something exciting or interesting that I've seen and that could be seen to tie into the theme of the week pretty well. I also just wanted to say, just kind of piggybacking a little bit off of what we talked about last week when Ash Clark was on, because the theme last week was time and timeliness. It's like, I feel like there should always be a disclaimer on anything we talk about, saying that though we are finding reasons for the relevancy of what we're talking about in this moment, all of these things that we're talking about are always relevant. And the idea last week was that, like, timeliness itself being sort of a lie, right? Like, these are things that we should always be talking about and always keep in our hearts. And, you know, this week there were great strides that had been made in terms of the SCOTUS ruling. But, you know, we also have to stay in terms of, you know, LGBT lives and discrimination in the workplace, but, you know, we have to keep on fighting, I think, is the message, to not become complacent. And that's it's something I always think about when I think about, you know, when we said, like, this week it's great to talk about this or this. I just always want to put that disclaimer out there until it gets boring and you find me nauseating. I'll keep saying it. But I also, the movie that I just wanted to mention briefly, it's up on the Criterion channel, and I had never seen it before, and I had heard so much about it for so many years. It's called Variety. It's directed by Betty Gordon, and it's, wow. I mean, I again, like, I knew the basic premise of it, but which I don't even think I want to give away, frankly, but I had never seen it. And of course, seeing something that's so aesthetically exciting for the first time, no matter how many years later, always gives like a real thrill. And so Betty Gordon, she came from experimental film.
You're welcome.
And she made.
That's your copy. That's your copy.
I think we got a little enticing.
Muting hijinks. You got a preview. Enjoy.
But yeah, I mean, Variety is just like probably one of the most exciting American independent films I've seen in a long time. And Betty Gordon, I was thinking about her specifically because that era of it takes place in Times Square in the 80s, and it's a very grungy New York 80s film from a feminist perspective. It's a female director, and I think that that's a particular history that has been largely erased. So, and a lot of what we're going to be talking about today has to do with histories that have been in one way or another devalued or erased. So, highly recommend Variety. It's really beautiful and mysterious and strange and erotic and odd. And Eric, if you're watching, there's also a Red Sox-Yankees game shot at the old Yankee Stadium in the movie. So no reason not to watch it. You've probably seen it already.
My recommendation for the week is videos of Confederate monuments being taken down. It's incredibly satisfying. I recommend it. And it's how I spend every morning to try and steel myself up for the things that are also very difficult on a daily basis.
Do you have a favorite?
Oh, it's so hard to decide. I mean, the other thing that I thought we'd mention, because it's so close to where all of us live in terms of like a victory moment in a sea of, yes, as Michael says, ongoing challenges, decades, centuries long ongoing challenges. If you haven't watched video or seen any photographs from the Black Trans Lives Matter rally that took place outside of the Brooklyn Museum, there are moments, speaking of history, I'm unafraid to sound a little bit Pollyanna when saying, like, sometimes that history is happening. It was incredibly meaningful in seeing 15,000 people gather in support of this community. Again, I know that there's a lot to be cynical about. There's a lot to say about how protest alone is not everything, but I think sometimes people who are actually the most vulnerable, who are the most disproportionately targeted by police brutality, can sometimes feel sidelined by a larger movement. And to know that in this case, there was such a rallying cry and such a gathering of support, standing up on the Brooklyn Museum steps and not being able to see the end of the crowd, feeling like you see an ocean of people. I hope that equal level of support and showing up for communities within the larger movement around protecting Black lives continues. Okay, I'm really excited to bring in our first guest, our film critic and Reverse Shot family, Caden Mark Gardner. Please join us.
Emerge.
From the shadows.
From the tunnel.
Hi.
Caden.
Hello.
How are you guys doing?
Yeah.
I just make this face. It's like more of a visual, like, ah. How are you, Caden?
Doing okay. Just basically unwinding from finally finishing the piece that went up earlier today with Michael's great editing sort of steering me away from a cliff.
No. The whole thing was amazing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, would you be able to talk about the piece a little bit? I know that
Okay.
you used the film disclosure as a starting point, but then you also took it as an opportunity to write about what you felt was not addressed in that film.
Yeah, there's many moons ago when I first watched Disclosure as a kind of a critic screener, I started to get the urge to just begin listing movies that I was not seeing included in the movie, or actually any trans actors or actresses, or even just important markers in trans history, like the tennis player Renee Richards, as one example. Mm-hmm. And initially I was kind of going to come in a little angry. Then that kind of went away over time. I just sort of abandoned that approach and just started thinking, how have I been able to articulate ways in which films are kind of just falling through the cracks and don't really have, and are kind of in a very strange place as far as no one wants to claim them, or they're kind of placed in exploitation, B-movie curios, are strictly in the avant-garde, but to say they don't have a trans element is kind of hard to deny. So I just wanted to just show the many different ways trans image has been used. While I kind of did sort of stick to more modern film history, just as, for example, using Christine Jorgensen being the first known American trans woman, sort of a marker. That's 1952. So I was more concentrating on that period and to present, but I did want to just show the sort of many ways trans images have been shown on screen and are not necessarily immediately negative.
What I loved about the piece, and like when you first pitched it, we were just like, yes, I wanted to, because I want to learn as a reader, you know, like I sometimes I take off my editor's cap and I just think about like, what do I want to actually read as a reader of film criticism? And I actually was like, yes, I want to know more about this. I want you to like take that movie as the starting point to actually to kind of school us in what we should be looking at, not just what we shouldn't be looking at.
Yeah, because I think sometimes it is what I can do is I either make recommendations or just say there are things that are out there. Sometimes they are quite easy to find. Like I remember just finding by hook or by crook, for example, the Silas Howard and Harry Dodge movie on Harry Dodge's own video page for free. And I was able to watch that, and it's kind of shocking that it is just out there on the internet, but still it's been, since its release, having an issue as far as mainstream attention, even though, at least in Silas Howard's case, he has been making rounds as far as shooting on television shows, very well celebrated television shows and all that. So some stuff is just out there. Some stuff is hard to find. Like I only just recently watched Sadie Bennett's Flat is Beautiful and was blown away by it. So I was very happy I was able to find it to sort of not just represent avant-garde cinema as sort of the marker there, but also just of adolescence and questioning, which I still think is a still pretty hard thing to show cinematically.
Well, I think one of the things that's challenging with a film like Disclosure is by setting yourself up as a complete survey, it like leaves you open to being challenged on about what's missing inherently in and of itself. Do you feel like there's a more meaningful way to try and engage with film history and a specified topic in this way?
Yeah.
Or not topic, but say certain kinds of representation.
Yeah, I was thinking about that because I know Apple TV had sort of Out on Television, which was actually like a 10-part series, which is kind of like the opposite. Disclosure is less than 2 hours long, where that might be about 10 hours long, perhaps. So it obviously wants to show the full LGBTQ spectrum on just television. I haven't yet seen it to really make any kind of remarks on it, but as far as length, I can approve of that. I think as far as Disclosure, they're just, even though it sort of limited itself with runtime, there still felt like things that I wouldn't necessarily say really belonged in any sort of serious discussion. Like, I don't know, like when I pitched to Michael, I basically was like, if I can distill why I do not like this movie and what I think is wrong with this movie, the Caitlyn Jenner reality series I Am Kate gets more discussed than Tangerine.
Right.
And that kind of sort of set me off and got me a little annoyed by it in a way. And because I do feel like it did not have to be the film that it was, there were ways in which it could have engaged a little more and a little deeper. And I wouldn't have to necessarily agree with it. Like the documentary that adapted from Vito Russo's The Celluloid Closet. Mm-hmm. How that film ends, I don't necessarily agree with because it's post Russo's death, and it kind of gets, in my opinion, into a little more assimilationist homosexuality. Mm-hmm. People portray stuff, and kind of has a we're getting there kind of positivity that I'm not necessarily sure Russo himself would have approved of. But still, I thought, as far as what it did a lot of the things as far as engaging with tropes, stereotypes, codification, even allegory, as far as people finding subtext in places that were not meant to be subtext, or finding gay or queer iconography in things that were not necessarily made for gay people.
Right.
So that is sort of just what maybe I would want from a film that was claiming to fully engage in trans history and film history.
Mm-hmm. One of the things you talk about in the piece, and this is one of those things, like Michael said, as a reader, you're really excited when a piece comes in and it has some ideas that you hadn't quite really like totally, kind of thought through before, and the piece helps you think about that. But I was hoping you could expand a little bit on an idea that you talked about the way that film aesthetics have traditionally been in a kind of, have been like how they've I don't know if you use the word attacked, but the way film aesthetics have usually related to the trans body in an unproductive way.
Yeah, it actually, like, it is something that has sort of been in the ether. Like Susan Stryker, the trans scholar, who is in the film Disclosure and has written extensively on trans cinema, so has sort of talked about just the art of cutting and celluloid, and has kind of aligned it with kind of how the trans body is almost used as a kind of Frankenstein body, as sort of the abnormal of being reconfigured and modified in a different way. And I always found that very engaging and fascinating, and just also, like, in general, like, yes, the way of how a body can be shown on screen that is a trans body and that isn't the sort of cis heteronormative ideal can be shot in a way that makes it look like a monstrosity, like a villain. And I do think sometimes, as a viewer, sometimes I am put off by a way a film does that, and sometimes at a certain point, I find the fact that a film might film a trans body that way, especially even some that are contemporary, to be kind of fascinating and do require additional sort of probing and trying to figure out why that is. Is it something that is perhaps something that is such learned behavior over time? That kind of stuff does fascinate me, as far as if cinema can either unlearn or perhaps think of the different ways in which a trans body can be filmed.
And I wanted to, I'm sorry, Farihah, did you want to say something?
No, please go ahead.
Oh, I know that and I'll make it quick, as we have another guest to bring on shortly, but there's another thing that I really responded to in the piece, which was specifically when you first started talking about documentary, not a documentary like a Talking Heads documentary like Disclosure is, but you talk about Frederick Wiseman's In Jackson Heights, which you talk about as being always thought of in terms of its multiculturalism. It's a great film. It was Reverse Shot's #1 movie of the year back in 2015. But specifically, you talk about how trans people are represented within the documentary format as bringing it in an aesthetic sense, like bringing a sort of truth to that representation, which is, and of course that wouldn't have been mentioned in this documentary, right?
Yeah, and like you see that that the trans women who get harassed by police and are claiming that they are being harassed by policemen in Jackson Heights, New York. It is fascinating that they are considered part of the community that is threatened, the community that is under attack. Meanwhile, there's a pride parade happening, and you have a New York City councilman who is white, cis, and openly gay be able to safely disclose his own identity, and have it be used as a way to sort of show that there is social progress happening. But meanwhile, you have people who talk about trans violence in that support group. And you sort of think of sort of the ways where some, but not all, are seeing the progress, while others feel like their visibility is something that they still have to be guarded about. Mm-hmm. And I thought the way he kind of documented that was very powerful, because I remember seeing it at the Toronto International Film Festival, and and this is a personal anecdote, I saw that movie with my mother, and I had come out to her. I had to come out to her almost all over again when I started hormone replacement therapy, but that kind of sort of tension, unsaid tension, that we had sitting next to each other when those scenes were happening is something that I cannot really forget. And Weissman, and I actually sort of loved Weissman even more for the fact that he was showing trans people in that way, and something that was multi-dimensional. That might have been something that my mother, who is a sort of white boomer, who might have not necessarily have seen trans people presented that way beyond like a news bulletin that someone got killed, essentially. So that always meant a lot to me. And I remember either 1 or 2 years ago going through Weissman's filmography and finding that scene in hospital to just be stunning and very upsetting, as far as seeing a cross-dresser who clearly is in mental distress, but perhaps in retrospect is not really getting the care that they needed. And I felt I had to include that to sort of show how people can discern what transness is then versus now.
It's just wild, the incidents in which the most radical thing is just to see people of any identity or background just doing stuff. You're like, what's so radical about this? They're just living their lives and talking about what's happening to them, as opposed to feeling like, okay, I'm putting on my trans lens now as a filmmaker. I'm going to put on this, I got to put on some other different view and specify how these people are going to be shown and seen, as opposed to, I guess, active listening, like what comes out of this organically. Yeah.
Well, it's funny, sometimes these, it comes back to a distinction that I think you draw in your first two sentences, Caden, and maybe it is actually just the first sentence, between films that, that seek to capture topics of social political import versus films that actually can bear that and can accept that. I think the disclosure seems very much to want to be, of the moment and collecting this trans history. But like, I feel, not having seen the film, but I remember those scenes from In Jackson Heights, because it is just people who are trans existing in space and existing in the world and having challenges that are, different than mine, different than others, but like challenges that you can see, you can feel. And there's something to that I think I was so glad that you drew that out in the piece, because it was unexpected for me when I was looking at it to see In Jackson Heights in that context.
Yeah.
I think it would be a great time to ask Lisa to join us. Lisa, who wrote about The Five Bloods, going to speak to that, Spike Lee, and many other things.
What up, guys? That was
Hi.
a very nerve-wracking process. Oh no, I'm being introduced. I have to stop flossing now.
There's a moment where you're invited to unmute yourself, and you're like, "What? I don't want to do anything."
Right. I'm like, oh no,
You did it,
pressure.
guys. You both did it like champs.
Yeah, it's amazing. Push that
Total
unmute
pros.
button so well. I get scared every time. We do this every week now. I get scared every time.
My heart is like racing.
You made it's so much easier than having like a panel in person too. It's like you don't have to worry about subways, you don't have to worry about walking.
Flip side, everybody can see yo shit is what I think about.
Right.
It's like a generic brick wall situation.
Trying to find the like most generic corner of my house.
Lisa, I was wondering if similarly you could start by talking a little bit about the way you decided to take on the review that you had published, I think, just hours ago, so it's very fresh. And I should add that I misspoke in referring to The Five Bloods of Period piece. I guess my mind was on this like sort of 70s era connection, and the flashbacks are so vivid of people's experiences, but it's set in modern day, and you can tell us a little bit more about how you responded to the film.
Sure, yeah. I basically just kind of the first thing that stuck out to me obviously was like Ride of the Valkyrie. That's where I started my essay, and that's like, that's what I heard. And then the scene is like really funny to me because I'm like, oh, those are some cool Jordans, and and it all just kind of came together. I haven't described the film in any way, so I'm getting too specific, but basically the movie is about obviously these four Black American veterans who go back to Vietnam. It's, kind of this, it's kind of a treasure hunt. They have to go find their friend, but they also have to get some gold that they left behind under mysterious circumstances. Right. And as so the movie kind of starts with them just getting there. They're in the hotel, they're getting reacquainted, and then they go to this club in Ho Chi Minh City, formerly Saigon, and we just kind of learn more about who they are and how the war has shaped them, and that kind of becomes, I guess, for me, the main thing about the film is just more who these men are and who they are in like the context of the present day, and how that's a product of where they've come from in their experience in the war, where they've come from in their experience being like Black men in America, and some of those things really pay off, and some of them don't. And
big swings.
Right. I don't know if it's ever a good sign when a bunch of people are like, this is your most ambitious film. Like, don't ever say this is your most ambitious piece of film, because it means I didn't accomplish a lot of things that I tried to do. but
Ambition
that's kind of
writing or film.
It is good, but sometimes it can like sound like a nice way of saying like, you really tried, but didn't quite get it. But no, I actually, it's long. It's almost 3 hours, but I enjoyed it at various points, and I was, I came to the piece kind of just wanting to kind of unravel his characters for myself, and through writing it, kind of figure out maybe what he was trying to accomplish.
That's what it's like with film writing, right? It's like you think you understand something, or maybe you actually don't think you understand it at all, and then through the writing you start to come to an idea. Like, I would have a hard time articulating anything if I didn't write about it first at this point.
Right.
I don't like for example, I'd love to talk about the Delroy Lindo character, because he's such a conundrum, and he's such a fascinating character on so many levels. And I feel like I'm going to have to watch the movie 3 more times, as painful as that might be in some ways, to really understand what Spike Lee and Delroy Lindo are doing there.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely stuck out to me. So there's this really like funny, meaningless thing. So Delroy Lindo plays in this movie called This Christmas, and he's like this family like patriarch. And that song, the freaking Marvin Gaye song that they like slide into like down like that line, he actually was doing like the same thing and the same dance moves in this other movie to the same song
From This Christmas.
yeah he just has that whole like, so it just, he kind of has this like this like image, I guess, in like Black culture, and so I was like coming at it from that perspective of like knowing like the type of character that he plays, or like you know, the potential of what he was going to bring to the role, and you know, the dad dance moves and all of that, and and he's just like doing like a lot, like, and I say that, you know, I obviously there's like more words I could use than saying doing a lot, but I mean doing a lot in the sense of like, when everyone's doing like the minimum amount, like he's doing the maximum amount with his body, with like the space that he's taking up. And like, I love that, just like he that disregard, I guess, that he seems to have for like a lot of the people around him just kind of comes out, and how like, you know, how in your face he is, how he like moves his arms around and like leans forward when he's like telling a joke, and just kind of flails around. It's a very big performance, which I liked in some places, and in some areas it kind of like, I don't know, sometimes I felt like it muted some of the other performances. So like, you know, but I'm sure that like he probably got the direction to just like crank it up as high as he could.
Yeah, it definitely was a choice, like a collective choice.
Yeah.
One of the things that I appreciate about Spike Lee as a director is that boldness, even though sometimes it's not always successful in however you want to measure that, but like that he's unafraid in what are sometimes like quite, you know, realistic storylines to present a different kind of performance. And that, you know, whether that's like a musical number or whatever, this idea that like you need very naturalistic performance to equal real life experience and tapping into the day-to-day experiences of people is not on his mind. He's like, what makes sense to me for this to like bring out the emotion in some way. It's hard to sustain that over 2.5 hours though, and have it resonate the whole time.
It's really funny because I always thought that this was Spike Lee's version of a naturalistic performance. So this is like some of like the dialogue that he uses like in his shows, like and his movies.
Yeah.
This is in the She's Gotta Have It remake. He's very bad about this, where people just say things that don't sound like things that people would say, and it takes you out of the moment. And like, a part of me is like, this is like a cool stylistic flourish, and a part of me is like, you're like dehumanizing your characters. I don't know.
Well, that's a big that's an issue. If you feel like it's not only does it not work or take me out of it, but that there's a feeling of like less humanity,
I don't think it's intentional though. Like, I think he wants to create really like groovy characters who say like slick things and like are, you know, talk like people talk in the times, whatever those times may be. And it's just like he says he has Paul Delroy Lindo's character say like, like, you know, niggas better wake up with the quickness or something. And I was just like, Spike, what are you talking about? Like it's a very like poignant moment where he's trying to say, where Lindo's character is trying to communicate that, like, you know, I see something that none of you guys see, and we all have to understand this vision.
And because he's a Trump voter, right? Isn't he saying that?
Right. He's saying it, and so I mean, that's obviously another element, is that you know, he says something that you know, he says like we have to like build the wall or something that lets his friends know that, oh, he's a Trump supporter, and they're like, what? Like, you support like President Bone Spurs or something, which is like a very niche reference, I don't know, to like Trump's like lack of participation in the Vietnam War. I was like, I wonder like if everyone's gonna catch that. Like,
years from now, right? We've been watching, well, I often rewatch Before Sunset, and during Before Sunset, Julie Delpy makes a reference to freedom fries. It's like, it's 2004, and everybody knew what freedom fries was then. Like, do people know what that means now?
Right. Like,
that's definitely like a marker between like millennials and Zoomers. Millennials remember when their fries after going to a baseball game were like called freedom fries for whatever reason.
I wish I could forget.
It was a stupid reason, but that existed.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I was rewatching. We rewatched Do the Right Thing a couple weeks ago, and Malcolm X, and it was this thing you were talking about, Lisa, a little bit. This like unreality, this kind of heightened sense of reality, this purposeful artificiality that really always strikes me again when I watch, you know, his great films, you know, from that great period. Yeah. I felt like Malcolm X especially has this like first hour that's just kind of, and it has this really elaborate musical sequence. It has incredibly exaggerated performances and costuming, and even Do the Right Thing, which is remembered as this, you know, kind of gritty truth-telling, which it is, you know, kind of like ripped from the headlines. Once again, not just timely film, but again, it's the way that the performances are delivered, the way that he sets up the colors and the compositions and the framing is all very unreal in a way, which I think he's doing here too. I think you're right.
Yeah, and I mean, the characters come alive because of like the people playing them. And I mean, that's obviously, I mean, he can get credit for that as well. I mean, he chose these people for a reason, but yeah, I mean, just in terms of the something that I talk about in the essay a little bit is his Vietnamese characters, because I think that they're an example where like the actor definitely makes the role more than what it was written as. And the woman who plays the character Tien, which is the girlfriend, the former girlfriend of Otis, who is one of the core members, she just this lovely performance. And from what I read, she hasn't been in a lot of stuff, but I don't know, she's always just kind of like smirking at him, and like, you know, just like, my favorite moment is when the daughter like walks in. I know I'm doing a terrible job of explaining this movie to anyone who hasn't seen it.
There's no way.
and you're saying that sometimes he also does a terrible job of explaining it, so don't feel the pressure.
Like, there's a daughter and she walks in. One of the Vietnam vets, he has a love child with someone that he, I guess, met on one of his tours there, and they just kind of reveal her out of nowhere. She like walks, you know, he's sitting down for dinner with Tien, the former girlfriend, and you know, her daughter like walks in and she's like, oh, like, I want to introduce you to someone, and he's like, what? And like the girl like walks in and just like kind of like says hi, and like she's just kind of like giving him like the funniest look, like, yeah, guess what? This is your daughter. Like, what's up? And it just like all came across, and she just wasn't saying anything, but it was just like such subtle like movements, and like, you know, I think she did like a little hair flip or whatever. It was great.
I thought that was like an Almodovar moment. Because, and weirdly, there's so many Almodovar movies where characters find out that they had like illegitimate children or their daughters they didn't know, and it's super matter of fact. They're just like, oh, by the way, did you know that this is your like son from a previous marriage? They're like, oh wow, isn't that crazy? You know, pass the toast.
Right. It's like, oh, like our daughter, and like and it just like cuts to like, you know, him leaving out the door, and he's like, all right, see you tomorrow, like kind of situation. You know, just another thing that like, you know, it comes up later, but it doesn't really come up later.
Yeah.
And it's just one of those elements that it, you know, as like a plot element, it really, the only thing it does is like tell you more about Otis's character.
Right.
And it doesn't really do anything for the story or for the actress herself. So I mean, his representation wasn't great. Like it like, I don't know. It's just like his redress to like be more inclusive of Black people just kind of failed Vietnamese people in a way, which is like a huge bummer.
Well, it's what's most saddening about that is that at the beginning of the film, he's going to great pains to create these kinds of connections through the montage between, you know, Vietnamese people being attacked by American soldiers and Black people in the United States being attacked by American soldiers. And I guess I was sort of troubled by where the film ended up with, you know, a lot of Black Americans just like mowing down Vietnamese people in a firefight. And that doesn't spoil anything for anybody who hasn't seen the film yet. But there was something about it that just felt like...
Big huge spoiler. What?
Yeah, I know. But like,
Not a spoiler.
It just gets like so out of hand. And I think that's something that Spike Lee's movies often do in like productive ways. They go so wild. He's throwing so many ideas in. But this one, I was a little befuddled.
It's about how you take responsibility for those choices. And I think sometimes what happens in those films is like, he wants like a last little gut punch, and then there isn't time to sit with what happened or what it means to the characters, and therefore what he's saying about them. So I know, you know, Michael and Jeff, we talked about watching School Days together recently, which I also thought of as an interesting corollary because, you know, it's set in the time period that he made it, but it has this montage that is like several archival images of Black people attending all Black colleges. It was a direct reference to the past and to bring us to this moment. And he's clearly working with that and thinking about that in an interesting way. And the film has a certain kind of tone, except all of a sudden when there's like an extremely homophobic scene, and then B, like a moment of sexual assault, which is treated, it's so close to the end of the film. I had no idea what to do with it. I was like, I don't know how the characters feel about it. It seems like it's not a big deal to them in the movie, which is bad. It wasn't even about necessarily that it happened at all. There, like you said, Jeff, there can be productive ways to deal with violence and, you know, other painful elements of life. But it's tough to just have that dropped in your lap without enough to kind of understand why it's there and what's being said.
Yeah, and I mean, you bring up an interesting point about the montages, because like I love that as a part of his style, that he uses so much like archival footage, but sometimes it can, when you throw out like a clip or an image, like you were mentioning, like the relationship of the violence in the States to the violence in Vietnam, and you don't follow up with it and in a narrative way that seems like satisfying, it can just seem like an idea that you were throwing out there. Like it can almost feel like, okay, that picture and that clip was all you actually had to say about this relationship, but you were kind of tricking me into thinking that you had a deeper thought about it that was going to play out between the characters. I mean, it's the same thing with the Malcolm X clip that I referenced in the piece, where you think that this is about to, like, okay, you've set it up, you know, with this radical idea that, you know, Black people are eventually going to turn against, you know, the American government that treated them this way. But that doesn't really play out in any of his characters. And it's like, you know, don't tell me to think about something for the sake of thinking about it. Like, you know, I want to know what you're thinking about this thing, and how you think that this plays into the film that you're making.
That's a really good point. Yeah, it's like I'm just in some cases I do want a film to just kind of say, here are some ideas for you to feast upon, and then in some cases I was like, no, I'd actually like to know how the artist behind this feels about this topic. Or
yeah, it depends. And like, it's in some things it's like, yes, I love that kind of like just stylistic flourish. I love looking at it. I love taking it all in. But when you're doing something this kind of heady, like, you kind of have to pull some of those ideas together, maybe even more so than you would have to do in a less political film, whatever that means.
Well, and sometimes the way of doing that is not even necessarily like sometimes I feel when critics make suggestions of that kind, the response from a filmmaker or even from viewers who are fans is like, well, what do you want them to do? Like, make a whole different movie or like create a side commentary? And it's like, no, use this. These are,
scenes,
you know,
right? Use the story. Don't just, you know, have then, you know, turn to the camera and say, you know, the American war, like, split up Vietnamese families. Like, you know, let me like engage with his family and the tension between his family. Just all you have to do is add a little interaction between him and the relatives that he's pointing to, that you could have told that narrative through. You don't have to add an entire additional subplot. Like, just make little choices inside of the film and not just bring in all this outside material that's supposed to tell the story for you.
Yeah, this actually was, I just was thinking about these questions of, you know, actual like engagement, artist engagement, and also, you know, how we're supposed to read something versus how the filmmaker might read something. And I was thinking about how this actually connects, you know, to what Caden wrote and to the thinking behind, you know, a film like Tangerine. I mean, you mentioned that Tangerine is like shown very briefly in Disclosure, but it's not actually engaged with. And Tangerine's a really interesting film, which, like, I don't really know, like, when I first saw it, I was like, I don't know what the filmmaker, Sean Baker, has to say politically about trans bodies, about trans identity, about race, about Los Angeles. I don't know what he has to say about anything, but I know that he's giving us a space to kind of bring our own engagement with it. For that movie, it felt like it.
Yeah, the whole moment with the fact that the movie is made with an iPhone, and you kind of have that a little more democratized way of seeing these people out in the world, and how you're kind of following them because the character Cindy is basically a bull in a china shop when she finds out that her boyfriend, after she gets out of prison, has been dating a cis woman. And that kind of, we just follow her rage and the way that he uses the iPhone to almost just capture her rage, but we understand her rage. We empathize with her rage and her struggle to some level, even though admittedly, the way she is looked at by, say, that taxi driver or her boyfriend is different. And it is acknowledged that these relationships exist and perhaps sort of show the ways of kind of discomfort with how sort of cis men view trans bodies, and sort of how sex workers and the trans experience are kind of interlinked in a way. Disclosure views of sex workers is kind of something where I did really question the respectability politics of it all, which is almost a whole other thing I can broach about off of this, but sort of seeing how Tangerine sort of shows lives and realities did stick with me, even though I'm not necessarily a fan of Sean Baker or or and even sort of seeing his other films, I'm not really sure he is the best filmmaker to present sex work. But as far as showing sort of a very democratized way of showing trans bodies in a way where everyone has this device, but he's suddenly showing it on people we see out in the world but don't normally see on the big screen. I was always sort of drawn to that.
Yeah.
Well, and maybe what made it feel, like you said, Michael, that even though the filmmaker's politics are not front and center and are not a part of the story, there's some cases where that's as it should be. Maybe that's part of what made the film, resonate in the way that it did for you, and in the way that Caden's talking about, where that's specifically what works, is it's like an immediate immersion. There's never any question of like, if this person should feel this way. They do. And like you said, like Caden, you're immediately with it. You're just like, okay, I'm with you. And I know what's happening. I know why you're upset, and I am on your journey. And that's it. Like, that's the perspective of this film.
And I think it's interesting. Sorry. I think it's interesting that some filmmakers, are better when they do that, and some filmmakers are better when they don't do that, right? And that's the Lisa's the last line of your piece, Lisa, which I just agree with. Which I just agree with so much, and it sounded like I said disagree. I just agree. Just say it. I'm sorry. I'm gonna actually, so I don't get it wrong. I'm actually just gonna. I just love what you say, and I don't want to get it wrong. You say the Five Bloods is at its best in the moments where Lee just states the grievances plainly. That's so true. It's like there's so much of the other stuff, the stuff that you're talking about. There's so much stuff in this movie, and
it's a lot. Is the quote.
But when the movie is like clear what it's about and it says it, that's actually when it's at its best. Some other filmmakers are like at their worst when they're telling you what to think. Spike Lee is like often like at his best when he gets it into the narrative, when he like talks almost like directly to you and says like, these are the grievances. And I just agree with that so much, So thanks for that. Do you have a favorite Spike Lee movie, by the way? What's your favorite?
Do I have a favorite? Man, I don't want to say Do the Right Thing, but I think it's fair, because I think a lot of people would say that's his best movie, maybe, if you're not talking out his documentaries.
I don't think you have to be ashamed.
That's my favorite. It's the one where like all of his flaws get in the way the least. He's just kind of a guy that gets in his own way. Like, all of his movies could be good, which you can't say for every filmmaker. But sometimes his quirks kind of get in his own way, and that's a movie where there are like different asides, like there are different pieces of dialogue and conversation that I'm like, all right, Spike, but it's one of my favorites. I also like School Days, as flawed as that movie is.
Have you seen Kirkland?
I haven't seen Kirkland. I was told
that's probably my favorite.
You're right, Kirkland is good.
So good.
I just have such a soft spot for the musical numbers, though, because because they're so perfectly done, but B, because of, I guess, what I was getting at earlier, which is someone saying like, it's okay that this is a realistic mode of storytelling, but I just have this musical number here, and that I'm allowed to do that even though I'm a Black filmmaker. Like, it feels like, that there was a sense of like, no, that's for like other people from this time or this background. And so I think I have a real soft spot for any that dare to do that, and Malcolm X for that reason, even though it also has things that I struggle with.
Lisa, I appreciate that you had the caveat, even say do the right thing, said if you put the documentaries aside. I love that perspective, because the documentaries are fantastic, and When the Levees Broke is as good as it gets, I think, in 21st century documentaries. So, but those often don't get talked about in this conversation because it seems like somehow not part of the narrative of Spike.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And if you look at like his fictional work, it's like, okay, you clearly want to do documentary work. You can look at it and tell that he would be good at this. And it's like, I wonder what, like, if I would have liked the documentary version of The Five Bloods, like, even better than the fictional version.
That's a really mind-blowing thing for me to think about, especially because we talk a lot about like how it's a nebulous divide anyway, and he engages with that divide in an interesting way. But what if he did come at it from like, well, this is primarily a documentary.
Right.
And I want to give a shout out to an editor of many of his documentaries, Sam Pollard, who we've had the pleasure of working with, and is just like an incredible filmmaker, and one of the people I'm so glad. I mean, he also made a film. Jeff, do you remember? Oh, Slavery by Another Name, that talks about the ways in which history of enslavement leads up to the current day. People usually only bring up the 13th in the discussion of that history, but he also does a really incredible job of talking about how like this is not a new thing. It is all part and parcel of the same trajectory. And he also edited a film that we saw recently called Juice that I had not seen and did not realize that Sam cut. So he's did a really interesting range of work and cut a lot of Spike's docs.
If we're going to shout out Spike collaborators, can we also shout out Clark Peters, who plays Otis in Five Bloods? And I think that, you know, he's an incredible actor, and I think it's the sort of performance that in the history of cinema gets overshadowed by the bigger performance. And Delroy Lindo's performance is justly getting that kind of reaction. But I think that sort of thing doesn't work at all unless there's a Clark Peters there to kind of be the soul of the film, really just holding it down. And but it's interesting that Clark Peters now in his collaborations with Spike, and in this film he's being overshadowed by another performer in Red Hook Summer, which I think is one of the great solitary performances I can think of in recent memories. It gets overshadowed by a very flawed film. So like we talked about the super flaws of that film, but we don't get a chance to talk about how good Clark Peters is in the film.
How do you define a super flaw versus a regular flaw?
All one word. I think first, like, oh my gosh, I hyphenate that.
Is it like the 11 o'clock number in a show? It is dropped at the last minute, and you kind of question everything and the motivations behind it.
That's it.
That's a great definition.
Good definition.
I saw that with a live audience at Sunshine, and Spike was there, but people at that moment were like, ooh.
I'm questioning everything.
Half of the performances are wildly miscast, and the other half are like masterful. That might be a definition of a super flaw.
Super flaw.
I love that idea. I wonder what my super flaws are.
Oh, you made it so real. Personal.
Wow.
I'll spend the rest of the day wondering.
I'm gonna
Let's all agree to leave super flaws to movies. All right, we need to raise a glass before it's too late.
So I'm going to bring up two things as I normally butt in at this moment. I want to first thank the reverse shot folks that are joining us out in the audience: Chloe Lizotte, Chris Wisniewski, Devika Girish, Edo Choi, Jordan Kronk, and Ryan Swen.
Yay!
I don't want to. Again, I'd love to know what anybody here wants to toast to, but I have to say today is the 90th birthday of Gina Rollins.
Oh wow!
And that can't go unsaid.
Happy birthday to Gina Rollins, and to history that's worth celebrating. Celebrating history that serves us. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Everybody.
Cheers. All of my
Cheers.
Cream soda.
This is my lemonade.
Down to the last drop.
So thank you so much, Lisa and Caden, for being here. We may ask you to come back someday. Mm-hmm. And you can just say, no, that was awful.
But like, don't say it now. Only do it privately, please.
This is great. This is better than I thought it would be. I was nervous. I've never been to one of these Zoom things.
Oh wow.
Same. I was really nervous.
It's never not at least a little bit weird. So I'm very happy that it was more than just that for you.
Yeah, you guys were great. You guys should take this show on the road.
It's global.
There are laptops. I guess we could move around a little bit, like this.
Yeah, that's taking.
That's the road.
I mean, it's like Lee movie now.
Yes.
Stop.
Why are you making that face? Why do you make that face when you do it?
I mean, it's like Lee movie.
Yeah.
Have a great weekend, everybody.
Have a great weekend.
Have a great weekend.
Yeah.
Happy 15th.